Chief Judge for the Magistrate Court of Clayton County, Judge Wanda Dallas, has created powerful shifts in the justice system. She currently oversees the court's administrative duties as its CEO, as well as sitting as one of the full-time judges in the court. She joins the conversation with her epic talk, Is Justice Blind or Colorblind? Join us in welcoming Judge Wanda Dallas.
Through the justice system, which is already kind of interesting, and I know it is myself, because I sit there. I want to say this to you. First, I praise God. I thank God for being here. I have been a member of Word of Faith. I don't know if they said this, but I've been a member of Word of Faith since 1991. We landed when Bishop landed. We used to visit the church that Bishop and his family would visit, and as soon as he landed at Word of Faith in East Point, we landed with him. So I've been associated with and affiliated with this church for this long. And I believe that there are things in our life that God will open up for us and allow us to do and allow us to accomplish if we're planted in the right place. And you're in the right place. So I want to say this, with liberty and justice for all. How many of you remember saying that when you were younger? The Pledge of Allegiance, with liberty and justice for all. How many of you believe that? So the U.S. justice system is the largest in the world. The largest rate of incarceration is right here in our country. In 2015, 6.7 million individuals were in correctional institutes. African Americans are 5.9 times more likely to be incarcerated than their counterparts, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. See, if there's always going to be any type of technical difficulty, I will be the technical difficulty. Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the chief judge in the Magistrate Court of Clayton County. There we go. And that means that I oversee a number of calendars. When people come to our court, when officers want to take warrants out to have someone arrested, they come to our judges and we have to decide whether or not the warrant is sufficient. We do a lot in magistrate court, but because of where I sit, I want to make sure that justice is blind, that justice is colorblind, but society doesn't believe that justice is actually colorblind. And I'll say this to you, I wanted to give some statistics just to kind of give some confirmation to things that I already suspect and things that I already know from sitting where I sit. As of 2001, 1 in every 3 African American boys born in that year, 2001, 1 in 3 could expect to go to prison. You hear what I'm saying? That's compared to 1 in 17 of white boys. So the U.S. has 2 distinct criminal justice systems, one for wealthy people and one for people that don't have money and people of color. Right? So that's concerning in itself. Is justice blind or colorblind? The large majority of blacks and whites say the criminal justice system favors whites. Look at this. When you look at this system, blacks say that they believe that whites and blacks are not treated equally. 86% say the justice system favors whites over blacks. Where are you looking? Perfect. Okay, compared to 9% who don't believe that the justice system favors whites. Hispanics believe that the justice system favors whites as well. 66% believe that when it comes to an African American, the justice system does not favor us, versus 29%. And of whites, 48% believe that the justice system favors whites, where 38% believe that it does not. And then look at Hispanics. 81% believe that the justice system favors whites, compared to 12% that don't believe that the justice system favors Hispanics, I should say. 68% of Hispanics believe that it treats whites better. 28% do not. And of whites, 45% believe that the justice system does not favor Hispanics, compared to 41% who say the same thing. Mass incarceration has not solved the problem. I'm going to say this to you. There are numbers that show that for every young person that is in prison, the prisons make between $40,000 to $65,000 per year. It costs them that amount of money. I want you to hear what I'm saying. It costs the prison system $40,000 to $60,000 to house these people. Why do you think they're building what they do? By the time individuals are in 3rd to 5th grade, they've decided how many more prisons to build. Because it's what? It's a business. It's a business, all right? Truth or lie? One thing that you see when you hear about the justice system and the court system is this balance, the scales of justice. What do the scales of justice really do? So on the one side, you have truth, but it's based on, the truth is relative. The truth is based on how you yourself are being impacted by a system that you may not trust, that you may not have seen treated your family that fairly, a system that you believe is inherently unable to deal with you as an individual, as a person of color. So when it comes to truth and you're balancing these scales of justice, fear, personal bias, and ignorance, that's the truth that people live. They live of fear. They live a life where they believe that they're not being treated as well because of the color of their skin. And the lie, liberty and justice for all. How many of you believe that there's liberty and justice? Raise your hand if you believe there's liberty and justice for all. So let's talk about this. Racial disparity. You'll find racial disparity in every single part of this system. So the police, more contact with African Americans. Resources are sent to neighborhoods that are higher in minorities. Did you understand that? 1 in 4 people arrested for drug violations in 2015 were black, even though drug use rates do not vary between races. Black drivers are stopped more and more likely to be searched and arrested. So let me tell you what happens. You'll have a police officer, and let me just say this first of all. What I try to do in Clayton County, what I try to do every position I've ever had, is work with the police to make sure that we have a relationship where I say to them, if I get something from you that I'm not comfortable with, I'm not proceeding with it. And I've been that kind. When I was a prosecutor, I prosecuted for a number of years with the city of Atlanta and with Fulton County. And when I was a prosecutor, I tried to make sure that the officers that came to court for anything, they were being honest. So if they said to me, I stopped the person because there was a suspicious person in a certain neighborhood, what does that mean? Does that mean because the person was black in a white neighborhood? Is that what made them suspicious? You have to articulate a little bit more to me than just that. But you know what? Let me say this, and at a certain point as I wrap this up, I'm going to let you know that you have an opportunity, you have a right to insist that the people that represent you, the people that patrol your neighborhoods, are the people that you can trust, and they're doing this in a way that is not biased, that is not prejudiced. And you can do that. And I'll talk about some things when I finish with this. But black drivers are stopped more. Let me tell you what's interesting. During the day, when a driver's race can be detected, this is when the majority of black drivers are stopped. In the evening, when there's no ability to discern a person's race, then there becomes an even amount of drivers that are stopped between black and white. So what happens if you're a black driver, you're driving up the street, then maybe you have some type of tint on your window. That could be arguably a reason to stop you. And they stop you for the tint, but then they decide that there's something about you that's suspicious. And here's what I hear in court all the time. He became nervous, like he was hiding something. Let me ask you a question. How many African American males that get stopped by police are not nervous? So do you think they're nervous because they're committing a crime? Or are they nervous because this system, this environment that we're in right now, already makes them nervous when they have any type of encounter with the police? Which do you think it is? And so what I do is the attorneys that come to court, I insist that they give me some case law that supports their position. Is it enough that a driver is nervous when you stop the driver? Is that enough of a reason to stop a driver and then search the driver? Because I'll say this to you too. The searches are higher for African American drivers. There's always more of a probable cause to search. I want you to understand that. And so when you search, Here's what's interesting to me, and the statistics show that each driver, whether it's an African-American driver or a white driver, they both are equally arrested for having drugs. Not arrested, but found to have drugs. So in other words, black drivers are stopped more often, more frequently, and searched more often. But when you look at the two, the black drivers and the white drivers, they both are even in terms of those two drivers that actually have some type of drug on them. But black drivers are stopped more often. So racial disparity is found as well in the pretrial phase. I'm going to tell you this. When I was a prosecutor, I was with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Fortunate enough to work in an agency that was a little bit more aware of, concerned with, and focused on keeping things so that the disparity did not happen. But I'll tell you this, there were some prosecutors in the office who wanted to, quote, win. So it was about winning more than it was about being fair. It was about winning your trial more than it was about doing the right thing. And so when you have these prosecutors that are driven this way to, quote, win, then how do you get the balance? How do you get the fairness? How do you get the equity that you deserve to have from this particular prosecutor? And believe it or not, people base, even attorneys, unfortunately, they base their perception on who's guilty and innocent based on race. So this is a perception, this is something that is so embedded in the criminal justice system that it takes a lot. You really have to stay on top of everything to make sure that there's equity. Sentencing. African Americans comprise 29% of the population, and they make up 57% of the prison population. Why do you think that? Truth or lie? And what or who tips the scales of justice? Judges, juries, society, or families? I'll say this to you. Judges, we're elected, okay? I'm going to talk about this again. Judges are elected officials, which means that we have a high level of accountability to you, which means when you sit at church and someone stands up and the bishop announces, we have a visitor in church, it could be a state representative, it could be someone running for office, it could be a judge. They're there because they're elected, and they need what from you? They need your vote. So who is going to tip the scale of justice? Someone who is aware of the inequity, or someone who thinks that they can hide behind the inequity? Juries. Here's my issue. When I was picking juries, and I was an assistant district attorney, I'm going to say this and be quite frank with you. I found that my African American jurors were more likely to want to be excused from jury duty. And so what happens? Who decides the fate of our sons? Absolutely. Someone who doesn't look like you. So the next time you get a summons to go to a jury, don't look for a reason to not sit on that jury. Do you have any idea how many people it takes to sway a jury to prevent a conviction from happening? How many people does it take to have a hung jury? Again, one. One person is all it takes. And when you sit on that jury and you hear something that doesn't sit well with you, it doesn't resonate well with you, and there's something in your spirit that's just uncomfortable that you're hearing, you can make a difference on that jury pool. And so don't look for a reason to not sit on a jury. Look for a reason to get involved. That's your civic duty to be on a jury, but it's bigger than civic duty. It's an obligation to protect our children, because that's who's being brought through the system. And then society and families. And I'm going to say this. I've had people approach me often that have maybe a family member that's been arrested and charged with a crime, and they say to me, I want to hire an attorney, but I can't afford to. So what they do is they let the public defender represent their family member. And I will never knock another agency or another department, but the public defenders are overworked. They have so many cases, so many files, and so many, they have these issues they have to deal with. They have to just stay on top of the law. And sometimes they don't have the energy to invest in this one case, this one client. And so maybe like, well, I'll just let the person get on probation. Well, let me tell you something. Once you enter a plea, whether it's probation or it's jail time, once you enter a plea, you lose your rights. You understand that? Now you have a felony conviction. It doesn't matter if you got 5 years of probation. You still have a felony conviction when it's time to vote, when it's time to own a firearm, when it's time to get a job. These are the things that are adversely affected by your conviction. So when I talk about the scales of justice, society, and families, as families, we've got to do more. I've seen so many situations where a person had a public defender, and I hate to say this, and now they have because they couldn't afford to hire an attorney. So now you have a loved one who's spending 15 to 20 years in prison because you couldn't afford to hire an attorney. I would borrow everything from everyone. They would be tired of me. Here she comes again. Because I would mortgage everything and borrow everything that I had to keep my child, to make sure my child had a good attorney. Not to say they're not good attorneys, but you get what you pay for. Separation of church and state. The Establishment Clause in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says that you have to keep church and state separate, and there's a reason why I'm going to talk about that. If you look at how there is this movement to take God out of society, to take God out of government, to take God out of schools, what is happening to these institutions? Our children, they don't hear God. Government doesn't hear God. I, from the bench, am not supposed to say anything about God. And I'll say this to you. If someone hears me mention God on the bench, what do you think could happen? I could lose my job. You hear me? And as a woman of God, you should see me trying to paraphrase scripture. And the people that I know that know what I'm saying, they know what I'm saying. I'm going to tell you what happened the other day. Today's Thursday. It was yesterday. I had a woman in my court was 70 years old. And she had 2 grandsons that she was raising. And I see a lot of that right now. The grandparents are raising the children. And they're twin boys. So one of the boys is okay. He seems like he's okay. But the other twin is not okay. And for the last 10 years, he has been putting her through all kind of challenges. He cursed. This is grandmother. He called her a bee. He told her to do something, some horrible act on his body, his grandmother. The child has a problem. The child is a problem and has a problem. So what I find people do is they come to the court for help. So I listened to this woman, and she was describing what her grandson was doing and how he was acting up. And she said this to me, and this grieved my spirit. She said, all I want is peace. Can you imagine being 70-something years old? You got this young man who put her in her garage because he was looking for some paperwork, and he couldn't find his documents. He's like, I need my birth certificate. I need my Social Security card. I know you have it. I'm not letting you out the garage until you find it. And then he threatened her. He said, just all kind of nonsense he put this woman through. And she was close to tears. And so I said to her, and this is yesterday, I said, ma'am, I said, what you've got to do is you have to recognize that this grandson of yours, you're sowing your seed on fallow ground. So you've got to decide if you want to sow seeds in fertile ground or fallow ground. And when the ground is fertile, your seeds will take root and they will grow. I said, but you can't be responsible for how someone else has been raised because he was raised by her daughter. So she already had a child that was a problem. She inherited this child that was disrespecting her and threatening her and just telling her all kinds of things about what he would do to her and what she could do for him. I couldn't believe the way he was talking to his grandmother. And this woman was like, you could see that she was just frazzled. And I just kept talking to her and telling her and paraphrasing everything I could think of paraphrasing. And she said, you know what? I hear you. I hear you. She said, and thank you. And she left, and I could just see this burden come off of her, because that's what God expects. He expects me to serve. He expects me to sow into people until they hear from me, through me, they hear the voice of God, or they hear something that perks in them or makes them realize who they are and whose they are. And they leave in a different way. I had another case last week, and I could just tell you about case after case after case. And this woman came into court, and she looked horrible. It's like she'd been drinking all night. She fell into court, and they had taken a temporary protective order out on her because her neighbor said she drinks and she gets drunk and she starts cussing everybody out. And I said, I can see that. And so I called her up to the podium. I said, ma'am, what's going on with you? And she was, when I tell you, sometimes you could just see stuff. I can just see things that are hanging off of people, that have attached themselves to people, and they bring them to court. And I started talking to her, and God said, keep talking to her, keep talking to her, keep talking to her. And I started to say to her, so what is it you see yourself doing in your life? Forget the fact that they're trying to do this temporary protective order on you. What do you see yourself doing in your life? She said, you know, at a certain point, I was going to church, and I stopped going to church because I'm tired. I said, ma'am, you can never be too tired to go to church. I said, so it was Friday. I said, so what are you going to do when you leave court? She just started chuckled a little bit. I said, ma'am, you got to change what you're doing. You've got to change what you're doing. And I talked to this woman. It took 25 minutes for me to see whatever she brought in with her drop off of her. And I kept talking to her, and I promise you, this, she just had, like, I can't describe it. It was frazzled. She looked like she was leaving court and going straight to get her stuff for Friday night and start cussing and arguing and aggravating everyone. And God said, keep talking to her. Keep telling her who she is. Don't stop talking to her. Don't stop letting her see who she is. And because she's been basing who she is on what her neighbors were saying, on what her life has dictated. And I kept talking and talking. And then I saw the breakthrough. Tears started falling down this woman's face. She said, you know what? I didn't expect this. And she started crying and crying and crying. And I could see this thing fall off of her, this spirit fall off of her, that it was holding on to her, that was preventing her from having, again, peace. Because what do we want in life? People want and expect to have peace. That's really what people want. That's what people that come to court are looking for. They're coming to court looking for peace. Because they don't have peace in their home, they don't have peace in their family, and they come to court because something broke in them or something broke in their family member. So what God expects, and I walk into this, is He expects people to be healed. He expects people to have their peace back. And so she left court and she said, wow, thank you. Thank you. And just at a point where there was peace. I'm gonna give this other story, and then I'm gonna move a little bit into what we can do, because this one had me crying. So I had a young man that came into court, and his aunt and uncle brought him to court, and they wanted him to not live with them anymore. He's a senior in high school. So they come to court, they're like, we don't want, they filed temporary protective order, right, which means he can't come around them. So they moved him out of the house. The police have to remove him from the home until he can have a hearing. He comes to court, his hair hadn't been cut in forever. And he's sitting at the table biting his fingernails. And as this like a little boy, he's like a little boy. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna have to work on this one. So I start talking to the aunt and the uncle. I said, what happened? They said, the aunt explained to me, well, this is my sister's child. And ever since she died, I've been the one raising him. And I don't know what's wrong with him. They call me and they tell me when I'm at work that men are driving up to my house, coming to my house when I'm at work. They tell me that he's leaving at all times of the night, going to meet men. This is a child. And I'm looking and listening. I'm like, okay. So then the uncle says, yeah, you know, he threatened my wife. He threatened all of us. We don't want him anymore. Oh, my goodness. We don't want him anymore. How do you throw away a child? So I said, okay, let me figure out what's going on here. So I talked to the little guy, the little boy, and said, tell me what's going on. And he said, well, he said, that's not totally true that people come to the house. He said, but I'm very confused. And then I saw something. And I said, tell me what happened to you. And tears started coming down his face. And he started to tell me how he had been molested. Because I saw the spirit over this little boy. I saw something over him that said, this is not his fault. This is what happened to him. And he started to talk about that. And at one point I said to his aunt, I said, did you know that this happened to your nephew? And she said, no, I had no idea. And I said to the uncle, had you ever talked to him to find out what happened to him? And the uncle said, I had no idea. So this little boy is just crying and crying and crying. He's 17 years old. This happened in May. And this little boy was about to graduate from high school. This little boy wanted to prom, and this was stopping him because now he's removed from the home. I said, where have you been sleeping? He said, wherever I can. I said, oh, It took 30 minutes to heal this family. And everybody in court was crying. I had to step off the bench and come back and get myself together because I think we all could feel the heart of this little boy. And then at one point, the aunt said, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I said, well, do you want to hug your nephew? And she went over and they got to each other and they fell on the floor. He was weeping and she was weeping and they were hugging each other. And she was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that this happened to you. And they just wept and wept and wept. And we were able to dismiss this temporary protective order. We were able to help this family heal. And I say we because it's always me and God. It's me and God. I'm like, okay, what do I need to say? What do I need to do? How can I be used? How can I serve? And so I stand before you as a servant. Do you know? I look at this position and I wasn't looking for this. As a matter of fact, I decided I wasn't going to practice law anymore. I was totally disillusioned by the system. I saw so much that kind of just discouraged me, and I decided I wasn't going to practice law anymore. And God said, oh, you are. And God, things happened in my life to put me in this position, and because of what happened and how it happened, that I know I'm just a servant, and I know that I'm only here by the grace of God. And I think that I try to make it as clear as I can. I speak a lot. I go to high schools and wherever I can go to speak to whoever I can speak to, I try to speak to people and let them know that I can't do this by myself. You cannot imagine the strongholds that I fight on a daily basis. You can't imagine the spirits that come in and attack on a daily basis because the enemy doesn't want a woman of God to be a judge. Oh, this goes against everything that he planned for his people. But I serve a mighty God, and I know who I serve, and he knows that I'm going to be the servant that his children deserve. So what I'm going to talk about is this. What can you do? First thing is jury duty. Absolutely. The second thing, tell you something. Vote. When I ran for re-election in 2016, part of what we had to do is look at the numbers and see who was voting and determine, where the majority of the voters were, and they're called super voters. Those are people who vote in at least 3 to 4 elections. And I was so disappointed because we can determine where the pockets of African Americans are. And African Americans were not the super voters. African Americans barely came to the polls. And so when people want change, you vote change. You have to vote change. That's how you get change. Let me tell you this. Police officers, they are appointed by someone who's elected. Do you understand that? So in Clayton County, the police chief is appointed by the commissioners who are elected. So if you think that you don't have an opportunity or an ability to watch what an officer is doing and make sure that what they're doing is colorblind, you do have an opportunity to make sure. And it's in your vote. understand the process in your particular county. You can go, when people are running for office, you can go and have them, like I invited out to different debates, and people ask hard questions. And nowadays, I'm gonna tell you, all these statistics that I found, they come from 2019. So this is something that's being put out there. Everyone is aware of the inequity in the justice system. I was a little hesitant to say it at first because I'm like, it's not politically correct, but it's true. So you can find the same statistics that I found that talk about how there's such a clear disparity in our justice system, and you can insist that justice become blind, and more importantly than justice becoming blind, justice needs to be color blind.